Okay. So the point of this is to record an oral history interview. So, do you know what that means?
Well, I've done interviews. I used to do radio.
Yeah.
I did quite a few interviews. I love doing interviews.
Cool. So the idea is, one of the things that we're aiming for is you know, I know that you like to tell a lot of stories, but one of the things we're aiming for is historical accuracy when we do this.
Yeah. You don't want me just to make stuff up.
Unless it's really good.
Well, I'm a Twainist.
I know, yeah. Say things as best as you remember them. Because part of the idea for this is to, if I, for Bamford and Charlie and any kids I might have, to get to have your stories recorded for them, and
I think that's a great idea.
And then part of the other idea about this is, since it doesn't seem like you're ever going to get around to writing your memoir, for me to kind of be able to take some of this and use it to write some stories based on you. So that's kind of the two ideas. Here, I'll get in the frame.
Well, I have been working on my memoir, but in my memoir, of course, I lie my head off. Because to me, like I said, I'm a Twainist. There's no reason to take a perfectly good story and tell the truth about it. You could elaborate on it and make it a much more enjoyable.
Well, that's okay. But if you lie, just make sure that I can't catch you in it.
Okay.
So the other aspect of this is I'm going to ask you a lot of questions that I already know the answer to.
Oh, really interesting.
Because again, that's the point, is to get it recorded. Okay. It's not really so I'm going to be asking you to tell stories that I've already heard a lot before. That's so the idea is, pretend when you talk to me, pretend that I've never heard any of these stories before, that I don't know anything about you. And then obviously I'll be asking questions because I do know you, so I might ask you to say, well, tell me about this thing over here that I know about, But when you answer, try to answer like you don't know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Like you don't know me and that I don't know anything about you. Because again, part of the idea for this is that, if I have kids and, can become something for the family, for generations that never did get to meet you and hear these stories before, right?
I see.
And again, partly just because that way, if I want to go back and again write down some of this, and then I don't have to remember, and I don't have to trust my memory. I could just go and refer to the recording. So, with that, do you have any questions for me?
No, I'm interested to see where you take this, because I thought I was really just going to sit here and just start rapping, sort of.
No, I
kind of like that. There's a little structure to it.
Yeah, no, there's structure to it, man. I've got a mission that I'm on here.
Okay, well let's.
I'm gonna be doing this with Mom too later, at some point, and I'm gonna hopefully get to do this with Mesa and Joe. Actually, I'd love to be able to visit Glenn and Louise and record them too. I'd love to be able to just kind of do a lot of these with people. Might just start doing this with my friends too.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm just gonna try to start collecting oral history archives. But anyway, cool. It is, I guess, here for whoever's watching in the future, if anybody is. It is January 4th,
right,
2025.
Yes.
We are here in Tucson, Arizona, in the studio of, or not the studio, but the gallery in the home of
my
studio of Ted DeGrazia. No, Ted DeGrazia.
Well, I mean, on their product, but this is mine.
And then this is Dad's studio that we're in here. So this is his jewelry table. He didn't make the painting there, but the piece right under that you can't really see. He made that out of glitter art. So we'll get to this eventually, but I think the best way to start is to start at the beginning. What's your birthday?
Well, I was born on July 7th, or 28th. 7/28, 1955.
I was about to say, I'm glad we're doing this now if you're going to start. If your memory's getting that bad.
Yeah, well, it comes and goes. But
July 28th, 1955.
yeah, which I think is a wonderful year. 1955. There were some cool things that happened then. Disneyland opened.
Okay.
That same summer, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I think that really kind of defines that era really well. 1955. It was a real focal point in history where the baby boomers and the kind of the uptightness of the the whole war thing and the reason they called these people baby boomers, that had kind of pretty much climaxed by then. And you'll find that in my history, if you look into it, that I was always kind of like, you know, either right at the beginning of something or right at the end of something, which I think is interesting. So we'll
get into that. And you were born Raymond Scott Owen, right?
Yeah, Raymond was my father's name. And I really don't know. My mother told me, incredibly enough, that she would tell me this, but she told me that the name Scott was one of her old boyfriends.
Oh, jeez.
And but for some reason, I think maybe it had something to do with F. Scott Fitzgerald. My mother was a reader, and he was extremely popular, you know, in her era. So, but other than that, I really have no idea where the Scott came from. She almost named me Duke, which was my little brother's name. And thank goodness she didn't. I wouldn't have wanted to have been a Duke so much.
Well, that gets us on the next topic then. Who's your mom? Who's your dad? Where were they when you were born? Were they in time and place in their lives? And
well, they were Virginians, and they were not bumpkins, as a lot of people from the South have been portrayed. You know, I think they were more. I know my father, he was a lot like you. You're a lot more like your grandfather than you are me in a lot of ways. And he was an avid reader, read everything that there was that he could get his hands on. But he grew up on a farm, and he...
Where in Virginia?
In Virginia, right, kind of Appomattox, Virginia, was like in his backyard, which is cool. That's where the war ended, Civil War ended. And he grew up on a farm, so he was strong because he did farm work all the time when he was young. And he had all the skills that a young farm boy would have. He knew how to, he was an incredible cabinet maker, really good with woodwork and things like that, really good with his hands. But my father, he was raised by his aunties and stuff because his dad, and like that's why he kind of took care of the farm a lot because his father, who I just barely knew, Mr. Owen, he was like a traveling salesman, and he was gone a lot. And I think he was a bit of a womanizer from what I know about him. And I know very little about him, but I think he was, and he was gone a lot. And I know the thing I did hear a lot was how my dad was raised by all these women.
Right.
And so we're Welsh on my grandfather's side. My mother was an Humphrey, Humphry, Humphrey, and she was of English stock, and her father was a country preacher, a Methodist country preacher.
And what was your mom's name?
Humphrey. Her name was Maybelle. good Southern name. Maybelle. But they called her Boo. Which was, and I think from a very young age, they started calling her Boo, and she always said, "That's for bootiful." And
That's
I
cute.
thought that was funny.
Yeah.
But Boo was.
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, Boo was a great name for her, and Boo was funny because she actually did have a bit of a. It was something very witchy. Not like the new girls who want to be witches kind of thing, you know, but like sincerely kind of like old English.
Yeah.
Kind of a witchiness that I think she would have done everything she could to shun it in most cases, but I think also that some part of her was kind of proud of that. My mother was a very, very complex person, much more complex I think than my dad was.
Well, so let's get back to your mother then. Sure. So you said her dad was a country preacher.
Yeah, so she traveled around a lot, from town to town out in would have been Western Virginia, up in the Appalachian area, Roanoke, Appomattox, Lynchburg, Bedford. I think Bedford was really kind of the home base for her, and there again, that's like Tom Jefferson country.
Yeah.
And the Jefferson ideals and stuff were very much part of what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And it came both from my father and my mother. My dad, nowadays, the party has become, like all of them, has become a bit bizarre, but in the 70s and stuff, he would have considered himself a libertarian. Because he did believe in small government, and he was certainly a capitalist. And he was also agnostic, whereas my mother was pretty deeply religious in her own witchy, very independent. She went to church and stuff, but
tell me a little bit more about her dad, because that seems to be kind of.
I know nothing really about him except for because I never met him.
Yeah.
And but there were lots of stories about him.
Yeah.
And they called him Hump.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly everybody loved Hump. He was like the guy, like he was one of those people that just everybody, like Mr. Rogers or something almost, and like everybody loved him, and he traveled around from here to there, and the kids, especially children, seemed to really love him. And I have a wonderful picture of him standing there with a big old goat that he had. I don't know if it was his goat or somebody else's goat, but he was very handsome, dark-haired, tall, large, dark-haired man.
I was wondering where the.
And he was educated and well-read. He was a preacher, and he died in a plane crash in the war, World War I guess it was, in Iceland. Their plane crashed into a mountain, and he was killed in the plane crash. My mother.
And he was preaching in the war, right? He wasn't.
Yeah, he was a chaplain.
Yeah, he wasn't a soldier, right?
No, he was a chaplain, and I know my mother. She was very country. She had this real, like what they call country sense nowadays. Back then it was just being a person, But like, I remember her telling me, she said, "Well, I really struggled with the fact that my father died." Because she was a little girl, she wasn't very old, and said, but like a week later or something, his whole regiment was wiped out, and she said, and I think that's why he died sooner, was so that he didn't have to witness his entire regiment dying in front of him, that's a nice way of her to, whether that's actually the case or not, but it's a nice. She was very good at coming up with finding mercy from God, so to speak. She would find ways that Boo had a really hard life. She couldn't stand her mother. Her mother was really overbearing. Her mother was one of these people with a Bible in her hand, and a stick in her other hand, and was always on my mother about being too promiscuous and stuff. And I think she was. She didn't really say that, but from all indications that I could, just kind of feels to me that she was promiscuous. And the way she tells it is she was kind of forced into marrying my dad, and that she wasn't really ever really that much in love with him. But it was kind of like, we want you to marry Raymond because somehow or another the families knew each other, and I guess he needed a wife, and I think he was a bit awkward maybe back then. Later on he became a real woman's man, but I think maybe when he was young he was maybe awkward. And
yeah, I mean every picture I see of him, he looks real kind of geeky almost, and
yeah, well, he was an intellectual at a time when that wasn't a popular thing to be.
Do you know when they met and got married?
I don't. I mean, anytime like this whole conversation, you're gonna find that I don't know dates.
Yeah. Well, do you know? Was it because he fought in World War II, right?
Yes.
So was it before World War II that they got together, or right after? Or?
There again, I think it was before, but I really don't know. There's so much I don't know about my family.
And so let's get. I guess.
I think it would have. It must have been afterwards because my oldest sister's 5 years younger than me. So
5 years older.
5 years old. So she would have been born in 1950.
Okay, that's Carrie Starr.
Yeah, so they must have gotten married after the war.
Okay. And then can you talk a little bit about Carrie Starr and Betty Dell and kind of the start of the family and then your birth and all of that?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about it. Carrie was born. There again, it's kind of a horror story. I guess my mother, Boo, and Carrie had a real hard time with it. Boo was, she could be really, really mean sometimes, and she would like whip Carrie really bad, like violently bad. And Carrie still just, carries the mental scars of that. She really basically can't stand Boo, and just Boo was cruel to her, not only by beating her, but would say mean things to her, like make fun of her the way she looked. Carrie had bright red, super curly hair, like kinky curly, and freckles and stuff. And I think Boo didn't like that look, and made fun of the way she looked and stuff even. So Carrie grew up with a lot of problems. And then my sister Betty she's right between me and Carrie. And she also can't stand her mother Boo, still to this day, even though Boo's been dead for quite a while. But if I bring up the subject of Boo to either of them, they immediately just kind of fly into a rage about how much they didn't like her. And Dad, Ray, on the other hand, was, everybody loved Ray, and he was very personable. I think especially later on in life, he got more and more that way. Because he was in the radio business, and so part of his job was to be personal and to be around people and stuff. One of the things about him was that he couldn't stand that whole, like I said, the Appalachian bumpkin kind of thing that was, like he saw that in the Army when he went in, the kids from the South they had a certain, they talked funny and stuff like that. And so he, like you would never have known he was from Virginia. He got rid of every little trace of an accent that he had, practiced real hard to not have that. And, it was just something he just wanted to separate himself from really badly. Then I was born, 1955, and then my little brother Duke came along 5 years later, and he was kind of a surprise, unintended.
Right.
And he also had a very hard time because he was, nobody really wanted him there to begin with. And I think by then my parents were starting to have problems. And out of the 4 kids, I know that I had it better than anyone for some reason. But my mother she really treated me almost like I was a Messiah type savior or something. She really instilled in me this thing of that, like I was just this, God's gift to the earth almost. In a lot of ways, I don't know how to, she would say things to me, about almost like I was like the chosen one or something, And that ended up, of course, it felt good when I was little
Mm-hmm.
to get that kind of approval and stuff from her. But later on in life, it caused me a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, let's get back to the story a little bit. To your story. So you're born July. I always forget the date of your birthday.
yeah, July 28th.
July
So
28th.
I'm a Leo,
You're a Leo,
which I'm very proud of.
which and fits you. 1955. You're born in Virginia.
Richmond, Virginia.
In Richmond, Virginia. Do you have an earliest memory?
Well, I was 5 months old and I hopped a train.
That's a good one.
From Richmond, Virginia out to Tucson, Arizona.
Uh-huh. Okay, so tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was cold until we got out west and then it warmed up a little bit. But no, we got here. And
Yeah, so your family moved here 5 months after you were born.
So I'm just a little kid. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know Virginia at all when I'm a little
Yeah.
kid. Since then I've been back and gotten to know some. But
Yeah.
it was a far away place to me.
And do you know why your parents chose to move 5 months? I mean,
Well, I don't really know very much about that either. I know that my dad was trying to get to Hawaii.
mm-hmm.
He had this thing about maybe from being in the service, maybe from reading books,
Mm-hmm.
something, I don't know, but he was very romantic. He had this romantic ideal about being in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, he was a real ladies' man. And I think he liked the women there for one thing. I know
Mhm.
he used to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
How beautiful the Hawaiian women were and stuff. And when I grew up, I heard a lot of they played a lot of Hawaiian records, on
Mhm.
the record player and stuff.
Was he really? I've actually never even asked this. Was he? What? Because he was a DJ, right?
Yeah,
And so what?
he did a lot more than that.
Well, yeah, but he must have been really into music, right?
Well, he was very, like I say, he was kind of intellectual with everything, and he loved music. He grew up with it. He grew up around like the Piedmont,
Mm-hmm.
blues. Josh White. I don't know if you know Josh
I don't know
White.
Josh White. Yeah.
Amazing, guitar player, and he had a certain style that
Mhm.
was called Piedmont blues. And he knew, guys like Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and
Mhm.
stuff, I think. And he actually knew some of these people because he was in radio in Virginia before they moved it. He worked at a station called WBLT,
Mm-hmm.
World's Best Little Town in Bedford, Virginia. And so yeah, he loved music, but he really loved mariachi music and
Mhm.
stuff. For instance, we didn't listen to classical music much.
Yeah. But did you guys listen to a lot? Was there a lot of music in the house growing up?
Not really.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the records.
Because you're very musical and you always have been, but
The records were there,
yeah.
and they would play them once in a while.
Yeah.
He never had a fancy stereo or
Yeah.
anything like that. I think that he got his kicks off at the radio station.
Right.
But he did a lot more than just being a DJ. Back in those days, radio was a thing,
Mhm.
and he did a lot of programs where he would find interesting people and he would, interview them and delve into their lives, which is
Mm-hmm.
connected to why I think I'm here today. Is I think that's how my dad knew DeGrazia,
Uh-huh.
was that he'd probably, because DeGrazia was really famous when my
Mhm.
dad was also pretty famous working on radio. And so he did a lot of that kind of stuff. And he would just do these special interest shows.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was really into the old classic cars, like the
Mhm.
Duesenbergs and Cords and Pierce
Mhm.
Arrows, those kinds of the beautiful, elegant old Bugattis and stuff.
Mhm.
I seem to remember him doing like a show about that on radio. I don't know how you can do a show about those classic cars on radio
That's a good point. Yeah.
without having like photos of them.
Yeah.
But he was the kind of guy that could do that and pull it off and
Yeah.
make it interesting.
So you guys moved to Tucson, 5 months after you're born.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
And Tucson was a dinky little cow town back then. where we lived on Alvernon, just right off the Speedway in Alvernon.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the far east
Which
side
is,
of town.
just to know, that's, I don't know, 10-minute drive from where we are right now, right?
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
far away at all, and I couldn't really show you exactly where it was,
Mm-hmm.
but there were some apartments there, and I know there was a pool
Mm-hmm.
because I was famous.
We've driven past before where you think it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was famous for jumping into the pool. I would jump into the pool. When I was just a little teen, I'm very little, like one,
Yeah.
and I would jump into the pool and just like sink down to the bottom and just sit there.
Mm-hmm.
And then like my mom would dive in and come in and get me and pull me back out, and I'd run and do it again and stuff. Which is funny because I'm kind of like afraid of water now, which is weird.
Yeah, I remember it whenever we'd go to a pool or the ocean or whatever, you'd never want to get in. Okay. So yeah, what are some of the, just if you could kind of paint some images here for me. So a little less of like the philosophy and psychology, but if you could paint some images for me of what it was like, your earliest memories, when your parents are still together, growing up in Tucson, your sisters, your mom and dad, what was it like just in your home, in your neighborhood?
Well, I don't really remember hardly anything about like living over on East Alvernon. I was too young. My memories kind of start. I mean, there might be some memories in there, but they're very vague and they're not necessarily connected to where we lived or anything. But I guess it would have been about, I don't know the year, but it probably was around 1960.
Mm-hmm.
We moved up to what's the north side of Tucson, and it was.
Oh, that's the house I've seen.
Yeah, and it was.
Also, I'm gonna start recording on my phone too because I realized just in case something
And it was.
goes wrong, I want to have two recordings. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, kind of my earliest memories kind of start there, sort of. And it was like a brand new house.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea of building these little suburban neighborhoods was kind of new at that point. And ours was one of the first ones in this neighborhood, and it was called Shadow Mountain Estates, which is what we all called the mountain right here that is actually called the Catalina Mountains.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And nobody ever calls it Shadow Mountain anymore, but a lot of people used to call it Shadow Mountain. And you've seen it, and you know why they call it Shadow Mountain.
That makes sense, yeah.
Because it's just this constantly changing shadows running back and forth across that mountain. So I was really right at the very western tip of Shadow Mountain, and there was vast desert all around me, and it was probably about the most perfect place for a beautiful sunset on Earth, just about. And I was just overwhelmed constantly by the beauty of the sunsets and just the whole idea of where we were. And there again, the timing on all that, because you're kind of like painting a picture of it was perfect. Like it's just like 1960, which was a time when the West, was really trending in America. And they were glorifying the whole Western image and the cowboys. And there really were cowboys here at that point. There were, there were ranches and stuff. Although ranching was never really that big in Tucson as opposed to say, Texas or Colorado or Utah, some of those places. But it definitely existed. And mining was kind of the thing in Arizona. We'd go down to like Tombstone, for instance. And Tombstone was like a place that I would go to, and I just loved it. And to paint a picture, you can imagine. So I grew up with these old, buildings like in Tombstone, these old wooden buildings with wooden walkways and stuff. To me, that was kind of almost like normal.
And Tombstone is the town where the most famous gunfight the West happened.
Yes, I've actually walked where they fell.
Yeah,
I did, and
I showed my friends that movie a couple weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, so this is the type of stuff my parents let me watch as a kid. You know, the one with Kurt Russell and
But yeah, John Wayne and those guys were just huge, when I was a little kid. And I was there, I was living there, in that desert where they actually filmed a lot of those movies in a place just not far from here called Old Tucson.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like it was built basically for movies, but they used it as like a tourist. It was like what do they call it? Like people would go there and they had rides, and it was an old theme park. Yeah, it was a theme park town, but it was really used in the movies and stuff. And so those movies that I saw were filmed right there, and to me, I could totally relate to the whole thing. And of course, I wore cowboy clothes, and I had a pistol, and I loved shooting. I was really into doing a quick draw. Like that was what was kind of funny too about the whole cowboy scene.
And you mean a toy pistol?
Yeah. They I don't like to admit that, but it didn't have bullets. And
I like to mess with my friends when I show them pictures of me as a little kid too, and I do kind of the same thing.
And like that was kind of the thing about that whole Western thing here too. For me, cowboys, they didn't really do anything except for they got drunk in bars and shot each other. Yeah. They had fights, and then they'd chase women or lose women around, and they'd get themselves in trouble and kill people, and stuff. That's basically what they did, and so I grew up with that whole thing. But for us, it was like the code of the West and all that kind of stuff was extremely important. There were certain things you didn't do, like there was a certain way that you were supposed to fight. Like if you got in a fight with somebody, it was really unmanly to use like to kick somebody in the nuts or something. That was completely out of you didn't do street fighting, back in those days. It was okay to hit somebody over the head with a chair, but don't. And like there were rules, and there were things like if there was a guy that you hated and you're getting ready to hang him, you'd let him have a good tall drink of water before you hung him. Like the whole idea of water was huge when I was a little kid. And I remember when I first saw that people were selling water, I just thought that was like one of the most outrageous things I'd ever seen in my life. Because water was like something that, and this kind of stuff had so much to do with the way I'm made up, I think, because like water was something that we all shared in common. Even the worst among us deserved a good drink of water before you hung him, and because out here in the desert, it was like we were all like the real enemy was nature almost, even more so than the Indians, I mean, I think the same would apply. You get to find a water hole and you drink with your Indian friend before you kill him, or he killed you, I mean. So it was a very bizarre, thing that was going on, and like I said, we were kind of between things because that was all kind of dying out, and the space age was just coming in. Because you remember, we landed on the moon, I think, in 63.
68.
68?
Yeah, but the space program was starting in early 60s. Yeah.
And like Disneyland, there you go. Like they had like the World of the Future with Monsanto's big display and all that, And
no, 69.
So it was a funny place to be.
And okay, so what were when you're a little kid, how do you remember? What are your memories of your parents' marriage? And
I don't remember hardly anything.
You don't remember
about
hardly
them,
anything.
Really. I don't remember them fighting much or anything. I have a couple, real strange memories. Unfortunately, a lot of them are when something kind of traumatic happened, like my mother would get mad at me for something that I did. And she was extremely violent and emotional. Like, one time I met, my mother was a Girl Scout leader, and she had a bridge that they had built, like just this little walkover bridge, and it, you know, probably had an arch and stuff to represent these girls passing through something on the Girl Scout thing. And we had a wood pile out in the backyard. We always had a wood pile, not firewood, but you know, planks and boards and 2x4s and stuff. Because we were always building stuff. My dad, he built all kinds of stuff around our house and around our yard. Like I said, he was real handy with his hands and his tools. And so I went out there and like I busted up the bridge to use the wood for something. So I just figured it was out there in the wood pile. Like my mother got just horribly mad at me for doing it. Like destroyed all my toys. Like with a hammer, she came and smashed all my toys up and stuff. Because to teach me a lesson about, you know, messing with her bridge, you know. So I had some kind of, most of my memories are really just me being by myself, running around out in the desert. And that was my favorite thing to do, is I'd just go out and wander around out in the desert. And I really loved looking for old stuff. And you'd find these like little ruins, not Indian ruins, but they were out there, but I didn't really know what to look for when it came to the Indian ruins. But the Hohokam had lived extensively right in that area and had irrigation canals and everything, but I didn't really know that. So I ran around out in the desert a lot and played with the cactus and stuff, which is weird, you know, because like cactus really can mess you up, but to me they were like to what other people would think of as a, you know, holly bush or something, but to me it was like a cholla and a saguaro cactus. And I'd go around looking for these old places and I'd find them. There'd be like, especially there'd be these little dump places where people had dumped their stuff. And you'd rifle through that stuff and find old bottles and things like that, and I loved doing that. And I had a thing with nature where it was like me, I had that me against nature thing, but it wasn't like it wasn't like I hated nature. It wasn't even like that I wanted to control nature, but I definitely wanted to have that dominion over nature kind of a thing. And I do remember this, and this sounds kind of wooey, but it's absolutely true. I do remember when I was running around out in the desert, hearing in my head, you know, what seemed to me spirit voices of the old Hohokam Indians. And they would just be talking to me about like being a good man and what it was like, you know, the whole thing of being there in that desert and everything. And I don't really remember much about what was said or anything like that, but I definitely remember, and I remember it very clearly that the fact that happened, that I was listening and hearing these kinds of voices and stuff. And that kind of thing has always been in my life. I used to have an angel. We didn't get to that. That was that kind of happened almost before we moved out to that. That's kind of a memory one of those memories that I have before we moved out to the north side there. So I had an angel that hung out with me named Gibbon Long Ogden Suet. And the angel was extremely important to me. And everybody knew that I had this angel, my family, they all knew that I had this angel. And the angel would like sit at the table with us and ride in the car with us and stuff like that. I could see him, you know, and he was like a ghost kind of, like this pale image of a very totally nondescript person sort of a thing. And that's kind of an interesting story because I actually remember when Gibbon kind of left me and I was playing catch. I used to love playing hardball, catch with a hardball and a mitt, you know. And there was a older guy, he was, he might have been in elementary school or something, he was older than me. And he would, he lived over this part of Tucson called Indian Ridge. And my mother would go over there and visit, and we'd go out in the alley and play catch. And I remember Gibbons sitting on a fence like a board fence,
Mm-hmm.
and he was kind of sitting up on it like an angel can do, kind of hovering on this fence. And I remember him talking to me. He's like, "Well, I'm gonna be leaving now. You're not gonna see me much, anymore." And but being a kid, I was like, "Oh, okay."
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take much to it. I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm playing catch here." It's kind of like when you have a dog and your dog comes up and
Mm-hmm.
you love your dog, but it's just part of your.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like your right arm, your right hand. You don't give it the honor and stuff that you probably should. And it was like that with Gibbon. I remember. I still vividly remember. It's like, yeah, you're not going to see me much, and I didn't until many many years later. Gibbon kind of showed up again in my life, and that was interesting. But and dogs also was a big part of my life when I was a kid. Always had a dog. Always had a dog. And I loved my dogs. I was just absolutely nuts about my dogs. And they were also the thing I learned from. To me, dogs were probably one of my biggest teachers in life. I just was amazed at them. To me, they were like spirit animals. The way that they could just do anything. They were just like, they could just lay down and go to sleep. And then wake up like they had never been asleep, just jump up and take off, and they never got sick, as far as I could notice when I was a little kid. I'd be sick, but my dog wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And they could eat anything and drink muddy water and do all that kind of stuff. And so I was just amazed at how tough they were, how resilient and tough they were. And then the whole thing of the loyalty that they had, the way that they were with you. And my dogs were just like right by my side all the time. And that went on until, a good part of my life. It's only recently in my life that I haven't had a dog.
Well, we're going to take a quick break.